Hello everyone, and welcome to Sullivan County 4-H Learn by Doing Beginner Watercolor Series. And today we're going to be working on a few different techniques and how to create depth through a painting. So we're going to be doing a galaxy piece, and other than the sky, the other thing we're going to be doing is a very kind of simple landscape in the front here, just to give it, again, a little sense of grounding. And then here we're gonna do kind of short deciduous or leafy tree that I want to have kind of like almost like a weeping quality to it, just to give the piece some additional movement, since most of it is in the sky. So it's not going to be a very big tree, and it's going to be a little different than how you would do like a non-weeping deciduous tree. So it'll be a silhouette, and that's pretty much just going to be the rough sketch that I use right now, because it's not going to be super detailed. So it's kind of an intro to deciduous trees. But later on, we'll go over them in more detail. So, how I'm going to start this painting is, of course, how we've been starting a lot of them. And I'm going to wet the sky first, and we're going to be working with the sky mostly wet. So I'm going to take it right down to my land. My rounded brush, and again, like all the other paintings, we're going to start with the lightest color first. And in a galaxy painting, you can pretty much go with whatever kind of colors you want. There's quite a variety that you can choose from. I'm going to go with kind of more purples today, and I'm going to start, I want this to have depth to it and movement to it as well. So we're going to add couple layers to this painting. Now this is going to be the warmest color of our painting, so I'm not going to take this color very close to any of the edges. Your eye is attracted to warm colors first, so I want to make sure that I hold the eye more in the painting than towards the edges of the painting, in a shape like this, where it is kind of moving. So now we're going to start to change that color a little bit to purple. I want these colors to kind of blend together, but also be identifiable at the same time. You'll see what I mean with that. So we're just going to keep darkening this color. This is kind of like going to be our base color. And we're going to, again, we're just going to add movement into the piece and just get darker as we go. So the colors I'm using are pretty much alizarin crimson, Prussian blue, and ultramarine blue once it starts to get darker. And remember, these colors are going to dry lighter, so if you want to kick the intensity of your color up, you need to make sure that it's really there when it's wet, because it will dry a touch lighter. So remember that the color you're working with is not the end color. Alright, so now at this point I'm going to be mixing mostly my Prussian blue with some Payne's Gray to give it this nice dark color to it. I'm going to blend that in with the purple, and that will be the darkest part of my piece. Paper is drying pretty fast, so you might want to wet yours a little more than I did, but that happens sometimes. So because my paper dried super quick, I have to kind of go over the area again to blend it all in. So that's what I'm doing right now. But if you use enough water, you can skip this step. And it should just all blend nicely for you. I don't mind going back over it again because that kind of adds some depth to the painting, but you run the risk of getting some hard lines if you're not careful. So that's kind of the gamble right now. Alright, so now at this step we're going to, I just want to add a little more texture, so we're going to do our trick while this is still wet, and we're going to flick some water onto this. It'll soften it out a little bit. Give it some more dimension, a little more depth. Okay. And I think I'm going to have a little bit of a line. I'm going to take a risk and touch this piece again to see if I can get rid of that. Might be a bad idea, but that is kind of the gamble you take when you do watercolors in this way. won't know how that turns out until it is dry. So. Just blend that area back in again. Alright, I'm going to dry this with a hairdryer and we will continue. Alright, all dry. So now we're going to start to work on our foreground, and that is going to be nice and dark, silhouetted against the galaxy. So we're gonna do Payne's gray, and then I'm also gonna add a tiny bit of Prussian blue, just so that the color, to make sure the color doesn't look super flat, because sometimes that makes it look a little strange when it's a silhouette, like it has no dimension to it. So now we're just going to try to remember where our gradient was. I always like to add a little bit of rollingness to my land. That's just me. Trying to get the color to be as solid as possible. If it's not perfect, that's okay. Like I said, sometimes if things are too dark or consistent, it makes it look awkward and flat. So that's our little outcrop, and I am going to dry this just because I don't want to get the base of my hand in it when I go to do my tree, because that will leave a mark on your painting if you touch with your finger or your hand wet paint. Of course you could scrape it too into your sky, which wouldn't be very good either, but it will kind of suck the color out of that area. So I'm going to dry this. Okay, and now we're going to work on our little kind of like weeping tree, and we will do a piece that goes into more detail about how to paint trees. They can take some practice, deciduous trees, or also referred to as leafy trees. They can be a little difficult just in the nature of getting them right, but not making them look perfect or symmetrical. It's definitely a balance with those guys. Okay, so unlike the pine trees that we covered last week, deciduous trees, we paint in the direction that they grow, so we're going to start from the bottom, and each time you take a branch off, you kind of also slightly narrow the trunk so that it makes it look more natural. And you can absolutely, at this point, if you wanted to, you could go back and sketch in a tree so that you had a design to follow. Two, I'm going to take my first branch off right here. And I'm going to go back to that branch in a minute. And then I'm going to take another branch off here. I don't want this tree to be too terribly big, so it's going to be a little one. So I have a little more room to work. feel free to move your paper so that it works for you. So as these branches come down, they of course need to get a little thinner. And you can kind of take as much off as you feel should be. This brush is a little thick for this kind of work, so I might change it a little bit. We'll see. The long skinny brush that we use to make grass is a good brush to use for something like this. It helps you lift your hand up and make it a little easier to get a nice thin branch. And if you wanted to, if you would have rather practice your pine trees, you can absolutely put a pine tree in here. You could just leave it as a field. That is up to you. Alright, so there's our tree, and I'm going to add some grass to this also so that there's a little more life than just the tree right there. So get our nice thin brush again. This is, again, good to use for branches as well. Now, to finish off the galaxy picture, we are going to be adding in some stars. And how we're going to do that is I'm going to take a paper towel and I'm going to kind of like cover this area because I don't want necessarily any white to go there. It'll look a little funny if you get your stars on top of your tree. So then, with a nice clean brush, take a little bit of white paint, which don't use a whole lot in watercolor because the whitest thing is usually the paper, so I am using white paint that is wet. It's not something I keep in my palette a lot, but if you have extra palette space, it does come in handy. And then just like how we made this effect, we're going to flick it. This helps to keep it random, not in a pattern. Make sure that you're doing this though in a spot where, because it is possible, you might flick some paint on some stuff. Watercolor does come off with water, of course, so it's not a huge deal if you flick it on something, but just make sure you do it in a spot where it won't cause any problems. And for this method to work, you need to make sure that your paper is super, super dry, or of course the white stars will just kind of bleed into the paper. So that part is very important. And you just kind of do this until you're happy with the way that it looks. I like to make sure that there's a lot of stars in my galaxy pictures, because usually if you can see a galaxy, it means that it's dark enough that you can see a lot of stars. You can control the size of the dots that you make too with your brush by having it more or less wet. If you want really, really small, fine stars, you have it more dry. If you want more sizable stars, slightly bigger, you keep your brush a little more wet, like that. And of course, as the water kind of naturally comes off your brush, the stars will get a little smaller again. But in general, when you're flicking your brush like this, if you want something to stay small, you usually have it more dry. If you want something a little bigger, you add more water to it. So there we go. Now we don't want this to look like kind of a weird line by our landscape that doesn't have any stars. So I'm gonna kind of use my paper towel to get a little closer, like that. And just add a few more down here, just like that. All right. And of course, if you wanted to, with this same nice skinny brush, you can take, nice and pointy though, you can even use a dot that is already there, but you can just take and make a streak of a shooting star. You can go like that if you want to. You can leave it kind of like a paint streak. I kind of like to do a combination of both, but it does lighten the star. So if you want it to be a little bright, you just don't brush your hand over it. So like that. Alrighty. And of course, you can change any of these colors in here. You can change the tree, you can add stuff, you could put a house there, that would be really pretty. You could put a little farm there with a silo, that would also be cool. But we're gonna give you a close-up of this now and talk a little bit about what we did. Okay, so there it is, all finished. And like I mentioned before, you can use whatever color you want in this. I've seen people use greens and blues in galaxy pictures, which are really nice. And the whole goal is just to add some depth to the galaxy picture so that it doesn't look so flat. When you think of a galaxy, it usually has these kind of convoluted shape to it, and it has darker spots and lighter spots, and that's the whole goal of making a piece like this. So just so that you can really see the stars, just to zoom in a little bit. There you go. You can see that the splatter is very random, and that's why I like to use that method when I'm doing something like stars, just so that I don't accidentally give it a pattern. It kind of takes me out of it. So I hope that you have fun with this piece. This is, I think, one of the most adaptable pieces in general, a galaxy piece like this, where you can really do whatever you want, and you have most of the paper is dedicated to the sky, and there's no rhyme or reason, and there's absolutely no way that you can paint a galaxy wrong. So have fun with it, really make it your own, and I hope that this has inspired you to try something like a galaxy picture, because they are very unique but really fun to do. So be sure to come back again next week where we'll go over more techniques. And for more information about Sullivan County 4-H or To get more project ideas, be sure to check out Cornell Cooperative Extension Sullivan County on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and follow the link down below for information about how to join Sullivan County 4-H. And as always, happy painting!